Namaste and welcome back to Waking Up with Mindful Serenity. We're going to continue along with the question from the jar exercise, where I'll pull out a question from the jar and begin to answer it within a 10-minute time frame. These answers, of course, will not be perfect, far from it. These videos will not be perfect either because I will not edit or revise. I have no idea what I'm going to say, and I will just put them up as is. That being said, I did pull out a question a few minutes ago and attempted to answer it twice, but the phone rang in one answer and the computer blocked and said stop taking video on the other answer, the other attempt. So I'm going to attempt again to answer this one question that I pulled out because it was such a good question, and I want to thank the provider of the question for asking such a question. And it will, of course, lead to, I think, a fairly good conversation. Do you have proof that there is such a thing as spirit? Do you, I'm meaning me, I suppose, have proof that there is such a thing as spirit? Now, that is a great question for many reasons, and mostly because I think a lot of us ask that question. We ask because we are scientifically minded, whether we know it or not. In this day and age, we have grown up to believe that we need scientific validation to prove the validity of something, to prove that something is real or not real. And when we talk about spirit, what is spirit? Spirit basically means the etheral, that which cannot be picked up by the five senses, that which is formless, that which is hard to understand because it cannot be measured by the scientific tools we have. And some people have different connotations for the word spirit. Some people will look at spirit and say it's the ghosties that are out there. Other people will look at spirit and say it is just the energy or the essence of some thing. Other people will say spirit is the internal being within us, in the what the yogis would call the Ananda body, the Atman, and what Christians would refer to as the soul. What is spirit? What we do know by the term spirit, what it means is that it is formless. So how do we scientifically measure something that has no form, that it is not matter? And of course, who does that burden of proof fall on? Does it fall on the scientific, the materialistic scientists who believe that if it is not made of matter and it cannot be interpreted by the five senses, then therefore it does not exist, to prove the non-existence of spirit? Or does that burden of proof fall on the religious affiliations and those spiritual traditions to prove that spirit does exist? So when we talk about proof, we tend to be relying on the scientific data, right? The scientific method of coming up with a hypothesis and attempting to prove it so that we can come to a valid conclusion that something is or isn't. So far, scientists have not proven that spirit has existed, but in so doing, just because they haven't proven, they're unable to prove that it does exist to counter the argument of a spiritualist, doesn't mean that they've proved that it doesn't exist. And so far, our religious traditions we're not able to prove that spirit doesn't exist, but they have yet to prove that it does exist. So it's not proven. It's not proven scientifically in a way that we, as questioning minds, scientific questioning minds that depend on validity, can relax into. We don't have an answer that proves it to us. And of course, what do we use to prove in the scientific world? We use scientific measuring tools, right? And we never had the tools, for example, to measure the oxygen concentration in air before, right? Before we knew that there was an oxygen concentration to air. But someone said, hey, I think there's oxygen in air, there's this molecule in air, that or this. Iron in air that we can use that helps us to breathe, and we need it for our body, and da-da-da. And someone would look at them and say, that's not true, you haven't proven it, to prove it to me. And they never had the tools then to prove it. But they stuck with her hypothesis, and they kept working on it and working on it and working. And finally, they developed the tools that would prove that there is oxygen in the air. Even though we cannot see it, it is there. So just because we cannot see something, just because we cannot hear something, just because we cannot taste, touch, or smell something does not mean that it does not exist. It is just beyond our capability as humans now. And we are always evolving and changing. Maybe there will come a time in our lives where we'll be able to see and hear and feel and touch these things, right? That we haven't been able to do to this date because of our evolution and the way the body adapts. And maybe we will more than likely develop the tools to measure these things, to measure what spirit is, to prove, to see it, to show it, and to say to the person who asked, do you have proof that spirit exists? Yes, I have proof. It's right here. But right now we can't do that. So right now, to my questioner, I will say, no, I do not have proof that spirit exists. Does that mean that I don't think spirit exists? And that's absolutely no. I know spirit exists. I can't prove it in scientific terms. I can't prove it to you, therefore, in a way that your scientific mind will accept and understand. I can't even do that with my scientific mind, and I do have a very scientific mind. I just know through my deep reflection and my inner research in the laboratory of soul research, as Yogananda would call it, that there is spirit. I have touched that spirit. I have felt that spirit. And it just makes absolutely sense to me, even though I can't prove it yet. Just like the scientists who question, well, is there oxygen, concentration in the air, and what is it, It made sense to them. It made such sense to them they couldn't prove it, but they knew because it made so much sense through their rational minds that they continued with their research and, passed on what they knew to other researchers who came after them until it was finally proven that there is a certain degree of oxygen concentration to the air that we breathe. There's a certain concentration of spirit to the lives that we live. We just have yet to find the right scientific tools to measure it and to show it. But that does not mean that it does not exist. So in my inner world, and it's just my inner world, and I'm not asking anybody else to believe that I know what I'm talking about, or that my inner world is something that everybody should experience. I have come to this knowledge that isn't scientific based, because it goes beyond matter. And our scientific experimentation to date is all related to matter and the material world, the physical existence of who we are. But when we get beyond our dependency on that data that we might receive in this physical form from the environment and see that there's something else beyond it, then we don't need that scientific experimentation to explain it. It just becomes a felt experience, a certain knowing that goes beyond scientific knowledge, beyond matter, beyond form, to the formless. And that is spirit, right? Spirit is the formless nature of our existence. And yes, it does exist. Consciousness is another way we can look at that word spirit, that knowing that we slept, even though we never dreamt or anything. We just woke up in the morning and we knew that we slept, and we were still in that sleep state of deep sleep, even though our senses were not picking up any data, even though there were no scientific measuring tools around to show that we were in deep sleep. We knew we were still there, even when we were in deep sleep. We did not disappear. What is that was still there? Right? What is that? That is spirit. And we just simply know. It's just something that we know after a while. And we depend less and less on the need to validate it scientifically through tools that are used to measure matter with, because it really can't, right? It becomes a felt experience of knowing the truth. So again, to this question, I say no, I do not have proof in a way that would, make your, to appease your scientific mind, or my own, or anybody else's probably. I just have a deep knowing, and it radiates in everything I say, do, or am. So that's my answer to that question. I'm hoping it makes a little bit of sense anyway. Thank you for the wonderful question, and thank you so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful day. Namaste.